It's Johnny O'Keefe and the new book, Johnny O'Keefe, Rocker, Legend, Wild One, goes on sale next week. And we've got Jeff Apter, who's a freelance journalist and written quite a few best-selling biographies on Casey Chambers and the Finn brothers, Michael Slater, Shirl, the story of a legendary larrikin. And good evening, Jeff.
Good evening. Good evening. How are you, gentlemen?
Good. You've got a penchant for these, rock biographies.
Oh, look, the stories are just waiting to be told, I think, in some cases. And really, if I mess them up, I'd be a bit of a mug, to be frank.
Of course, yeah.
Johnny O'Keefe story, I mean, frankly, I think I probably could have filled a couple of books. You know, he lived such a large life, even though it was relatively short. You know, and as Andrew said before, he had this generosity of spirit and this incredible ability and ambition, too, that, every single day of his life was packed with something, some kind of high, low achievement, new dream, new goal, new ambition. I spoke one of his managers, or the guy called the name of John Hanson, who worked with him over the last 10 years. He said, Johnny would call him at 3 a.m. I've got an idea. I've got an idea. And John would say, my idea would be to go to sleep.
Yes, of course.
But that just wasn't part of the deal.
He'd be very hard to live with, I would think, as far as family and marriage.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, as history has proved, he certainly had one unsuccessful marriage. Although, they had 3 great kids.
Yes.
And, Vicky, of course, is still has a life in music and is doing quite well. So they've all gone on to achieve great things themselves. And I think his second marriage to Maureen was quite a stabilising one. I think for the last few years of his life, he lived as normal as an existence as Johnny O'Keefe could live.
Yes,
That's the best way of putting it.
You know, Jeff, he was small in stature, but he had more front than Mars, didn't he?
I've heard that said many times. And it is an interesting thing, though. Nowadays, most pop stars, and let's say, he was a pop star, are polished within an inch of their life, and they're kind of cut from a certain cloth, if you know what I mean. JOK was a little rough around the edges. He looked a bit more like a footballer, and he didn't necessarily have the greatest voice on Planet Pop, but he knew how to present himself. He had that great charisma. There's wonderful stories about him playing at the Sydney Stadium, and he'd be second or third on the bill to some big American headliner. People like Fabian and Ricky Nelson, who weren't necessarily rock and rollers, and Johnny would be on stage, and the star of the night would be standing side stage with the promoter saying, "You didn't tell us about this guy." He really knew how to win over audiences, and also to put the fear of God into American stars who came over thinking they're on a bit of a working holiday.
In doing a biography like this, Jeff, and the other ones you've done on mainly rock stars, where do you start out? Do you do interviews with people who worked with them, or do you go back to their childhood?
I like to do a lot of research first. I like to listen, particularly surround myself with their music, because I'm mainly writing about musicians. It's good to spend a period of time while I'm going through everything that exists, newspaper articles, all kinds of different documents, to really absorb myself in the music, to get a feel from the era. It was very important with the JOK book to really get a sense, because I'm in my early 50s, so I'm kind of the generation after, if you will. I remember him quite vividly growing up and as a teenager when he died, being a teenager when he died, but I had to kind of relearn a lot of that music and that era, the 6 o'clock rock era and things like that. So, I do spend a lot of time just kind of trying to soak up as much of the atmosphere, if you will, as possible. And it was great with this, because there's a bit of footage still remaining in various archives and museums of 6 o'clock rock and the early TV shows. And they're wonderful to watch, because it's not that kind of cool, clinical production that you see nowadays. It was all a bit kind of anarchic, but in a wonderful way. Heavily Australian-dominated, lots of Australian talent. Some maybe not so talented, but he was supporting them. And that's another thing about JOK too, is that he played a really instrumental role in the careers of people like Peter Allen and Lydia Newton-John.
Yes. When you look at rock and roll today, they're made up mainly of groups. There's not many just solo artists who come out like JOK and perform.
That's true, and of course he came through in the era of solo artists with people like Elvis and so on, and, I guess Little Richard and people, but then that era of the groups certainly threw a spoke in his wheel when people like, Billy Thorpe and the Aztecs, and Normie Rowe and his band, and, a lot of other groups were coming through in the mid-'60s, and Johnny had to kind of redefine himself. And I guess that's when he headed a bit more for the middle of the road, when he became, you know, you played Counting on You earlier, and that kind of typified the direction he was heading in the 60s. You know, he put on the suit. You know,
yes, that's right.
Yeah. And he wore it well, too, it has to be said.
Jeff Apter, you say in your book that he recorded 33 top 40 hits, 33 of them. I don't think even John Farnham could match that.
No, it was a record that stayed intact until Kylie Minogue in, I think, the late 90s, or even the early noughties, I believe. So that record stayed for a long, long time. It's incredible, isn't it, when you think about it?
By the way, it would be pleasing for you to know I was over at Kmart in Northcote the other day. The book is selling like hotcakes.
Oh, fantastic. That's good to know. No,
yes, everything was going off the shelf.
Well, Jeff Apter, thank you very much for speaking to us tonight on the occasion of the book on Johnny O'Keefe, and it's called, where is it? Here we are. Johnny O'Keefe, Rocker, Legend, Wild One. Goes on sale next week.
Yes, you can buy it now, actually.
But thank you very much. Yeah, and look, having Andrew on is fantastic.
Yes.
Because I think he has such strong and you know, vivid memories of a man who obviously left it. And I think Andrew's got a lot of Johnny's...
I think he has too. I think he has a lot of presence on television and on radio.
Absolutely.
Jeff Apter, thank you for chatting with us tonight.
Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Good night.